why should we expect, Charlie, that Mike Pence would be popular in the Hang Mike Pence party?
Have you ever wanted a podcast that did it all? Sports, politics, world events. Well, you have come to the right place, because you are listening to C&C Talks.
Hello, I'm Colin.
And I'm Charlie.
And welcome to the C&C Talks podcast, episode 35 of our second season.
Just a reminder, as due every week, we release every Wednesday, and we talk about politics, world events, and sports. It's currently Monday, October 30th, 2023, at about 8 p.m. Pacific time. And because of when this episode's coming out, happy late Halloween to all our viewers.
Yes, happy Halloween, and Charlie, happy November. Just 2 months left in 2023. That is an exciting prospect.
Yes, it is, and we have some big things lined up for Season 3, which will start when 2024 begins. Anyway, we should get right into this huge politics section we have lined up, starting with the fact that the U.S. government finally has a Speaker of the House. After a long road, we finally have a Speaker. Who is it, and what does this mean for Congress, Colin?
I mean, it's shocking, isn't it, Charlie? Right? They were finally able to do something, like it was the bare minimum, but at least it's something. And the new speaker is Mike Johnson. And I'll get into Mike Johnson in a minute, but do want to quickly explain kind of how we got here. I think we left off last week thinking that Tom Emmer was probably going to be the GOP nominee for speaker, and he was the nominee, but it was very clear that he could not get the vote. And Trump also nuked his campaign right after he won the Republican nomination. Trump went out, said a bunch of nasty things about Emmer on Truth Social. So it was clear that he couldn't get the vote. So it became Mike Johnson. He was nominated and then elected. He was unanimous among Republicans, I should say, on the House floor. Something that's kind of shocking given how divided they have been. And Charlie, Mike Johnson, he's from Louisiana. He's, I believe, only been in Congress for like 6.5 years now, so rising very quickly. He was the vice chair of the Republican conference. And Charlie, he has some very interesting views, I guess I should call them, far-right views. He was not only an election denier, he led the effort in the House in 2020 to overturn the election results through not certifying the results of the election on January 6th. He kind of led that plot and led the plan to sign on, House Republicans signing on to that lawsuit filed by Texas against several other states, looking to throw out a bunch of votes, that lawsuit going to the Supreme Court. Johnson led the effort by Republicans to sign on to that. Beyond that, he is in favor of a national abortion ban and also wants to roll back gay marriage. So, Charlie, this is an extremist.
Absolutely, and particularly at a time where the U.S. really cannot afford extremists and really cannot afford any more delays. With that government shutdown still impending in just, I believe, 3 weeks now. November 17th, I believe, is the deadline. As well as the U.S. also needs to pass critical bills to help aid in both Israel-Palestine, and in Ukraine as well, as there's another big battle going on out in the East.
I did have a couple quick points to add on, though. First of all, once Johnson was elected, a Republican said, "We're back and better than ever." Well, no, you're not. You're definitely not back and better than ever. It took you 3 weeks, Charlie, to put a Speaker of the House in. It's the most basic task of governing. I wouldn't even describe it as governing. You're just electing a leader. It doesn't get much easier than that. And you fought over it for 3 weeks until finally you came to somebody. And so, no, you're not back and better than ever. You're still divided, and you're still not working for the American people, which kind of leads to my second point, which is at the press conference after the Republicans nominated Johnson. He was asked a question, Israel aid, and he gave a non-answer. He basically said, "We're not talking about policy tonight." Okay, well then, when are you going to talk about policy? Because, like I said, it was 3 weeks of no policy going on because you were busy trying to choose who the next speaker would be. And it turns out policy wouldn't start when he became speaker because all the members went home to their districts because apparently they were too tired at doing the bare minimum of governing. Like you can't make this up. It's beyond parody. Like do work for the American people. But like my God, like what are you doing here? And then the final point, also from that press conference, a reporter asked Johnson about whether like the democracy aspect, is he pro-democracy because of like he attempted to overturn the 2020 election, and he was booed by all the House Republicans. A member of Virginia Fox told this reporter Rachel Scott of ABC News to shut up. It's like this proves that you don't care about democracy. Like there's nothing democratic than shouting down a reporter who reporters are supposed to be beacons of democracy for asking you whether you support democracy and refusing to answer the basic question over whether you support democracy, proving that you do not support democracy, Charlie.
Yeah, and I really think that is a key point. This chaos twice in 1 year. First with the 15 ballots it took to elect Kevin McCarthy, and now this recent battle really does not help the Republicans in 2024, with, of course, the entire House up for election, as well as the possibility that they may have had to attempt to take the lead back in the Senate. This is really hurting their chances, and this is some friendly fire, certainly from the Republicans and from that small group of Republicans who took all those concessions from Kevin McCarthy only to kick him out just under a year later and set off all this chaos to begin with.
Well, yeah, that like you kind of summed it up. And like final point, like it's October, Charlie. It's not like we're talking about this in January. It's October. They've had 9 months, and we're still talking about who the Speaker of the House should be. Like that's insane. Like get your act together.
Let's move on now to some more U.S. news involving elections. Mike Pence has now dropped out of the presidential race. Colin, why do you think that is? Because in my opinion, it's because his ideas of what he stands for are so similar to that of Trump that he couldn't really find a base within this Republican primary audience to convince anyone to vote for him instead of Donald Trump.
I mean, I think that that's fair, but I also think it's a lot simpler than that, which is why should we expect, Charlie, that Mike Pence would be popular in the Hang Mike Pence party?
You make a very fair point.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I got to imagine that there's people that saw Pence drops out of presidential race and are like, wait, Pence was running in the presidential race? Because he certainly wasn't doing a good job of it. His campaign was boring, much like him, because he has just absolutely no character and really never got off the ground. And Charlie, let's talk about some tragic news that happened now in the state of Maine. Something that we haven't discussed one of these in many, many months, but that does not mean that they have not been happening. It's another mass shooting, and this one, Charlie, is one of the worst ones. Left nearly 20 people dead, over a dozen more people injured. Shooter. They finally, a couple days later, found his body. It looked like from self-inflicted wounds, but Charlie, this just keeps happening.
Yes, and one of the keys here, I think, is the perpetrator of the shooting itself. This man was in the U.S. Army Reserve and had apparently had visions. And in fact, the police actually checked up on him 6 weeks prior to the events of the shooting and determined that really he shouldn't have a firearm in the first place. So the question is, how did he have a firearm in the first place to commit this crime?
Well, I mean, he was part of the army, but like that's exactly it, right? Like he was hearing voices inside his head. He had spent time in a mental hospital over the summer because of that, and because he threatened to shoot up a National Guard base. And the police came and checked on him because they were worried he was going to commit a mass shooting. But guess what? Maine doesn't have red flag laws, so he was still able to own a gun, and to the surprise of absolutely nobody, he used it to go kill a bunch of people, and now there's a bunch of people dead because our laws aren't good enough, and nothing we have done has done anything to stop it, and nothing that looks like will happen this time is going to stop it, because again, nothing will be done. And the old argument, the only thing that stops the bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Well, where was the good guy with a gun this time? He wasn't around, just like there's never a good guy with a gun around. In fact, this guy was a gun instructor. He was supposed to be the good guy with the gun.
And yeah, you do bring up a very good point here, that it's one of the defenses that has been made by pro-gun groups, that there will always be those who have firearms who will use them for good purposes. But time and time again, they don't show up. Now we have some
The
news.
Republican Party continues to not care about it because they're owned by the NRA. I mean, look at new Speaker Mike Johnson, Charlie, who's basically said, "I pray that the evil can end." Well, stop praying and start actually doing something. Like, take action. If you think that the problem is mental health, which I agree, mental health plays a role, then don't actively block mental health funding as the Republicans have done time and time again. This is the only country that it happens in, and it is infuriating.
Yeah, it is truly a uniquely American issue.
Exactly.
Now we have some news. The United Auto Workers strike that started, I believe, earlier this fall has finally come to an end now, with GM agreeing to a tentative deal, as Ford and Stellantis had already agreed to deals with the United Auto Workers. This is a huge win for that union. Pay increases will drastically go up over the next few years, and a big win for the United Auto Workers.
Yeah, huge win. And Charlie, there's been a lot of wins recently just for labor organizers in general. We saw it with the writers, we're seeing it with the United Auto Workers. It looks like the actors are close to getting a deal done. So this is very, very good for workers. But now let's move on to a couple of pieces of legal news surrounding everyone's favorite topic on this show, Donald Trump. We sure talk about him a lot, Charlie.
Yes, we do, and never for good reasons.
No, never for good reasons. He's in more legal trouble after, well, two gag orders. First of all, the one regarding Jack Smith's case, the January 6th case in D.C., where that Judge Chutkan, has reinstated the gag order that had previously been lifted on Trump. But the other one that's more notable is in New York, the civil fraud trial. Trump had been gagged. He had violated it once, been fined, I believe, $5,000. Then he violated it again, and the judge, Charlie, he wasn't having it, put him up on the stand, forced him to testify under oath about this. At the end, found him not credible and fined him $10,000. But Charlie, I think the real question is, how many times does he have to do this before he goes to jail? Because at some point, fines aren't gonna cut it.
No, considering the amount of money that he supposedly has, he's gotten in trouble for some financial things in New York previously, so I don't know how confident I can be in that statement, but you do bring up a very good point, that he can keep doing this, and if he can keep doing it, he can get away with things, he will keep doing it. There's no reason for him to stop. I think
exactly.
maybe...
What good are laws if they're not going to be enforced? What good are a judge's order if it's not going to be enforced?
Yeah, exactly. And we have some more news from Trump's legal team this time. It's never good, like we said, when your own legal team and advisors are pleading guilty. Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesebro did that last week, and we got another one. We got another one going.
It was Jenna Ellis's turn. Same case. This was in Georgia, the racketeering case. Jenna Ellis joins Sidney Powell and Kenneth Chesebro in pleading guilty and cooperating with this case to stay out of jail. So there's still a lot of defendants left in this case. I believe 15, but more and more are probably going to start to flip on Trump. And ultimately, I think it's clear that, like, the big fish here, really the one who Fani Willis is out to get, is Donald Trump. And I mean, obviously, I can't see him pleading, but there's a lot of evidence here, because you've been charged with racketeering and you flipped on someone else who's been charged with that crime. That person's probably in trouble.
Absolutely. Now let's look to the world stage. We have some more news from the Israel-Hamas conflict. Israel seems to be moving ahead with its ground operations, with armored vehicles formations moving across into Gaza, as airstrikes between the countries using missiles continue as the U.S. attempts to mediate the situation. And as this continues, it looks more and more like a possibility that this conflict will spread, whether unintentionally or not, to the rest of the Middle East.
Exactly. And Charlie, it's also looking more and more like neither side is necessarily in the right, I would say. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. I don't think the some of the decisions that have been made by Israel and the IDF have been good decisions. I would say that they are even terrible decisions, some of them that were made. But I will also say that if there's a group that is going into your country that is beheading babies and killing
Yep.
civilians and kidnapping a bunch of people, then I think you should probably do what you have to do in order to stop that group from happening. Now, I will say,
E-
attacking
Exactly.
Palestinian civilians and not Hamas is unacceptable. However, Hamas has been known to hide some of their military assets within civilian buildings, which causes a lot of trouble for Israeli defense forces trying to get Hamas targets without harming Palestinian civilians. We have an update, by the way, on the aid that is supposed to be flowing in to Gaza. The United States is still trying to work with Israel and Egypt to get that across, but it does appear that finally some aid, though small, is finally starting to flow in.
Yeah, would quickly want to point out something that we discussed maybe a couple weeks ago when we had guests on to talk about this issue, which is some of those pro-Palestinian rallies that we're seeing basically everywhere right now, rallies to basically free Palestine, right? And there's a whole debate to be had over whether Palestine should be freed, and ultimately, I lean towards the side of yes, in some ways, it's very complicated. But now is not the time, Charlie. Their government, if you can call it that, carried out a terrorist attack. If your first reaction to that is free Palestine, then it sure sounds like you're sympathizing with Hamas on that attack, and that is not good. Now, believe me, I think you could absolutely protest some of how Israel has responded to it, but it is just not at all the time to talk about freeing Palestine. I'm not saying that there's not a time; it's just not appropriate right now.
Absolutely. Now, we have some news on a hurricane that has occurred in Mexico. Colin, I don't know a lot about this, so I'll give this one over to you.
Yes, this is hurricane that slammed into Mexico, devastating the region. Left last I saw, it was roughly 30 dead, but I think that number could be a lot higher now. Now, Charlie, what made this hurricane so devastating is it was projected as a tropical storm that was barreling towards Mexico until about 24 hours beforehand, Charlie, when it picked up, I guess, and was upgraded not just to a hurricane, but to a Cat 5 hurricane, Charlie. And it left the people in the region very little time to prepare. They had never seen a storm anything like this. A Cat 5 is no joke. It's like evacuate now or things are not going to look good for you. And like people just did not have time to do this. So just a horrific situation in Mexico.
Yes, and just for those who do not know, Category 5 hurricanes are classified as hurricanes with a sustained wind force of 157 miles per hour or more. Now, as you can imagine, that can very easily tear up things such as trees, cars, people, and houses. That is why
Exactly.
evacuations are necessary for hurricanes of that magnitude, and that is why such devastation can occur when they hit.
And I believe that they didn't have running water or electricity for a time. I believe that some of that has been restored, but there's still going to be a lot of work to do to heal that region, Charlie.
Absolutely. Now it's time for Charlie's Thing of the Week. And as we're getting into our sports section, actually, this one is twofold. This is about scoring in the NFL.
All right.
This question is a two-parter. First part for you is I was looking in on this. What is the most common score in the history of the NFL?
All right. I know you love scoregamis, so this question does not surprise me one bit. I don't. How am I even supposed to guess this? I'd imagine that it's like. Oh, I feel like we recently had a day where we had three scores of like 23-20, so I'll go with that.
You were incredibly close. 23-20 is the third most common. It's 17-20.
That was
And
going to be what I would have gone with next. Yeah,
the other
makes sense.
question that I have for you is ties in the NFL are very, very uncommon. But what is the highest scoring tie in NFL history?
Huh, that's interesting. I was just noting that we haven't even had any ties yet this season,
I will
so
give you
a
the
bit
I will
odd,
give you the
but
teams and the year. I doubt that will help, but it might.
all
It
right.
was Raiders Patriots October 16th, 1964.
That does not help me at all. I doubt that there's one in the 50s, and I kind of doubt that there's one in the 40s. Let's go like 34, 34.
That's did you say 34?
Yeah.
You would have been right if you flipped them 43-43.
All right.
Yeah, that was a speaking of scoregamis, we actually got one in the NFL this week. If you don't know what scoregami is, it is a concept purely invented by John Boys of Dorktone and Secret Base and SB Nation. But it's the idea of unique scores in the NFL. This can be done by folding paper in ways that will form origami when the team scores, and each shape will be different, leading to unique outcomes. As of the end of this week, we have had, I believe, 1,080 something unique scoregamis. And this week's one was the Cowboys and Rams with a score of 43-20. We've actually had a couple this year. If you'll remember, a few weeks ago, I mentioned the game between the Texans and the Ravens ending 25-9. The other one from this year was 25-11 on September 25th between the Eagles and Buccaneers, as well as that 70-20 blowout of the Broncos by the Dolphins earlier this year. Anyway, let's get into Week 8 of the NFL.
Yeah, let's. It was a very busy week right after we talk about the NFL. We'll of course get to the World Series, which is the big deal. But let's start, Charlie, with that first game of the week, that Bills-Buccaneers game.
Yeah, this game was interesting. The Buccaneers should have won on that last Hail Mary if any of their wide receivers actually turned around to look at the ball.
Yeah, they should have. I did.
Do you have any
Have a
confidence in
weird
Buffalo?
question. No, not at all. They've looked sketchy at best. We'll get to that division race in a sec. But Charlie, what did you make of that decision by the Buccaneers to go for two, which was really odd in the fourth quarter?
I didn't actually see any of this game, so I'm not sure. But given the fact that it's the Bucs and this team, I can't imagine it was good.
Yeah, it was weird. You mentioned though, like the Bills, they're supposedly in a division race against the Dolphins, but the Dolphins are still looking pretty strong. A big win over the Patriots, who the Bills failed to beat recently, Charlie.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. The Patriots looked somewhat competitive against the Dolphins, but not enough. Dolphins going into a big game this weekend against the Chiefs in Germany.
In Germany, yep. And the Jets and the Giants, Charlie. This was, of all of the games played this season, this was certainly one of them.
This was genuinely awful. This was
It
terrible.
was a bad product.
The Giants had their third string quarterback. Both teams combined for 24 punts. The game ended 13-10, and the Giants had 7 yards passing. Yes, not 70, 7.
7. Yeah, it's sad. It's really
That is
sad.
terrible. And this actually led me to something interesting that I don't know why they do this, but the NFL takes away passing yards due to lost yards on sacks. And I was wondering why they do that.
I do not know, but I think it's a
Because
bad rule.
quarterback gaining positive yards on a run counts towards their rushing total, but a sack doesn't.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that's weird, and I feel like it's more on the offensive line with sacks.
At least according to the research that I have done. Now, let's move on to what are the Giants planning to do at quarterback? Daniel Jones is bad and got hurt, and Tyrod Taylor was better and is also hurt. Who's their quarterback?
I mean, they should they go sign one? I don't know. They seem to be pretty much out of the race at this point. So, is there even a benefit of going out and getting a top quarterback? I mean, you need someone to play the position, but like just make it your practice squad quarterback and punt on the season, just like they punted every single time that they had the ball this past game.
Looking at the quarterbacks that are available in terms of free agency, not a great lineup of guys. Yeah, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, Colt McCoy, Joe Flacco, Nick Foles, and then a couple of guys I've never heard of.
Yeah, you mentioned Matt Ryan, which is interesting because he was actually in the broadcast booth calling that game for CBS Sports.
Yeah, he is technically not retired yet.
No. What's interesting though, Charlie, is that we were having this same discussion a few weeks ago with the Jets, but then Zach Wilson has actually looked pretty good.
Yes. Now, if you're a Jets fan, don't don't get excited. I know he's looked good,
But
but
you're the
he's looked
Jets,
good for him. Now, let's look at who you have to play. You get the Chargers and Raiders. Those are winnable. And then you have the Bills, the Dolphins, the Falcons, the Texans, the Dolphins again, the Commanders, the Browns, and the Patriots. Yeah, you are really going to need Aaron Rodgers back if you're going to do anything. They can
I mean, they
sneak into
might
the
get him.
playoffs. They could, but they're not beating the Chiefs. They're not beating the Ravens. They're not beating the Jaguars. They're not beating the Dolphins.
Yeah, we'll talk
Plain
about
and
that
simple.
playoff picture as a whole a bit later, but let's move on to an NFC game, Charlie, between the Eagles and the Commanders. Eagles, Charlie, remaining the top team in the NFC with the win over the Commanders, but for the second time this season, they looked very sketchy against the Commanders, who was also the first team to hand them a loss last season when they were undefeated for a while.
Yeah, that is interesting. There's always those teams that play very well against certain opponents. They just match up very well, and I think the Commanders match up really well with the Eagles. They beat them last year to ruin the undefeated season. They almost beat them twice this year. The Eagles. I know they won, but this is a big get right game for them against the Cowboys. If they lose, I don't want to say they're in trouble, obviously, because they would be 7-2. But this is a game that you really do need to win. Now, as
And I
for
mean,
those
none of the
Cowboys,
wins have been that impressive, Charlie.
yes. As for the Commanders, they've looked decent. Their record doesn't show it. But Sam Howell has been genuinely great when he hasn't been getting killed by his own offensive line,
Which is most of the time.
which is most of the time. Now, as for those Cowboys, which I just talked about a few seconds ago, they blew the Rams to smithereens this weekend.
I mean, it ended up closer than it actually was, but I was just I was watching NFL Red Zone on Sunday, and I saw did they have that? Was it a defense? Was it like a fumble return for a touchdown, or was it a pick six or something? And
In the
then
span of about
like
5 minutes, the Cowboys kicked a field goal,
yeah,
got a pick six, blocked a punt for a
that was
safety,
the punt block. Yeah,
almost
oh, it was the punt block.
almost returned the kickoff, scored a touchdown, forced another 3-and-out, and then scored again.
You're right. It was the block punt for a safety. I saw that, and then like 1 minute later, I see that the Cowboys are in the red zone again, and I'm just like, wait, are you showing me a replay here, or what's going on? Like they started out very strong. Rams, they got on the board late, but it was garbage time at that point anyway. But Charlie, the bigger question for the Rams now, though, who's actually they've looked pretty competitive so far this year, a lot more competitive than I think some of us thought they would be. But now they're down their quarterback. Matthew Stafford got injured. What should the Rams do?
See if you can sign Baker Mayfield again. It
I
worked
mean,
last time.
it did, but the Buccaneers, they started out strong, but they're now kind of in free fall. Like we discussed that loss to the Bills. They've lost, I believe, 3 straight now. Things aren't looking good there. I mean, it's possible, but what do you have to give up to get him? Who he's actually looked decent this year.
Yeah, he has. And, I will say, someone who I do think that they could be able to sign if they can get him. Jameis Winston, I feel like would be a great option in that offense. I know he throws a lot of picks, but that touchdown production is there, and if that defense, especially with Aaron Donald, can hold,
Yeah.
I like the idea of sending Jameis Winston to the Rams.
Well, what have you thought about like how long Stafford's going to be out?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure exactly how long he is out for, but he did miss nearly all of last season with injuries. I know he came back and played a couple of those games, but he really did not look himself last season.
And injuries have kind of always been a problem for him throughout his career, I feel like.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's move on to a game that, oh geez, Will Levis just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, exactly. Charlie, the Titans, they beat the Falcons. Ryan Tannehill was injured, so the Titans decided to do something I've never seen before that I found quite stupid, to be honest, which was like a platoon quarterback situation. Some of the plays they'd have Will Levis in, some of the plays Malik Willis. And Charlie, after one game, I think it's safe to say which of them will be getting more snaps going forward and which of them will be getting less.
Yes, Will Levis, 4 touchdowns, 3 of which were to DeAndre Hopkins.
Really impressive.
I will admit that first one was absolutely pass interference, but it wasn't called.
Sure.
But
And then
at the same time,
Ritter.
Desmond Ritter for the Falcons, he goes down as well. This is a bad week to be a quarterback.
We've already discussed 3, and Charlie, I believe we have 2 more to go, which
We
we'll get
do.
to in a minute. Move on to the battle of the number 1 pick and the number 2 pick in this year's draft. Bryce Young and the Panthers facing off against C.J. Stroud and the Texans. And Charlie, it was number 1 that came out on top. Panthers finally get a win this season on a walk-off field goal. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this was a good win for the Panthers, but you do really have. But if you're really looking at Stroud and Young, I would say that Young certainly has more weapons around him.
Yeah,
I think C.J. Stroud in the long run is going to be the better quarterback, but if they both don't pull an Anthony Richardson, these two, I can already see that they very well have the potential to have some long careers and some historic moments for both of these franchises.
I feel the same way about Richardson, though, honestly. I mean, obviously he's injured right now, but he looked pretty good before his injury this season.
He did. Now, as for some games with really not too much importance, Saints take down the Colts. Saints offense finally woke up a little bit, but overall I don't think this game really has too much importance. These two teams both on the outside looking into the playoff picture.
Saints can have division odds still, though, with that division looking not good.
Now, for a game with a little bit more significance, Steelers and Jaguars. The Jaguars are scrappy. They find a way to win, but absolute disaster for the Steelers. Down goes Kenny Pickett. What's their plan?
Cry, give up on the season. I mean, somehow they'll find a way to finish over 500 again
because they have Mike Tomlin.
Always did. Yeah, he always does. But Charlie, I'm more fascinated here by the Jacksonville Jaguars, who they started out rough, but have really turned things around. They're looking honestly kind of unstoppable at the moment. They're racking up some big wins.
And you told me it was bad to pick them at number 3, didn't you?
But the Chiefs are still better. Don't ask me what they did this week.
Oh, speaking of which, Chiefs, yikes. 16 games is where the streak ends. The Broncos finally, mercifully get that win over the Chiefs that they have been waiting for. Wilson, he cooked. Mahomes had the flu and didn't play great. And also turned the ball over a bunch. There's no concern for them. They need to beat the Dolphins this weekend in Germany, and I have no doubt that they will. But just some other key games
could do with showing up at their games again, because Travis Kelce was not great.
Some other key games. The Vikings beat the Packers. Vikings won 4 straight, but is it fair to say that losing Kirk Cousins dooms their season?
Well, so it's interesting because, Charlie, there's an argument that could be made that Kirk Cousins was looking as good as he ever has this season, despite the Vikings record, and now the Vikings finally back into the playoff picture, but Kirk Cousins out for the year with an Achilles injury. I can't see the Vikings recovering from that.
Yeah, and their current backup plan for quarterback is a 5th-round rookie this year from BYU, which reminds us that the 5th round's probably the highest a BYU quarterback should go. Zach Wilson, I'm talking directly to you. I know you've played good, but you've been awful since you were drafted.
Exactly. And Charlie, the Packers, though, Jordan Love, he started out looking pretty good, but recently has not at all looked, real bad.
Just some other games quickly to get through just to wrap up this week. Chargers beat the Bears. That's not a surprise. Lions beat the Raiders. No real surprise there. Cardinals couldn't get it done against the Ravens. No surprise there. Seahawks got it out a close win against the Browns, despite the refs trying to throw the game.
Yep.
As well as Joe Burrow. Oh, the Bengals are so back, and the 49ers are cooked.
Oh, yeah. The 49ers, their bye week could not come at a better time. They need to get things back on track right now. They've lost 3 straight to some bad teams. The Bengals, Joe Burrow, every year he does this thing. He doesn't start out well, probably because he always starts out the season injured. Then he always picks it up and gets going just in time. They've still got a little bit of ground to make up in that division race, but I think it's definitely possible that they do it.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to college football, because this week, just like the NFL, was wild, wacky, and really stupid. First of all, let's get Oklahoma, what were you doing? You lost to Kansas. Kansas is not ranked. This isn't basketball. How are
They are
you losing
now.
to Kansas?
Charlie, I've got to hand it to Kansas because they're ranked now, and they are a two-loss team. I believe they're bowl eligible now officially. They made a bowl last year, the first time in a while. Their coach has done a great job turning that program around. Things are looking pretty good for Kansas. It's their biggest win in a long, long time over Oklahoma. But if you're Oklahoma, even with what I think is a much more talented Kansas team than they get credit for, you can't lose to them if you're ranked number 6 in the country.
Speaking of teams you shouldn't lose to, Washington gets bailed out twice in a row. They barely snake by Arizona State, barely sneak by Stanford. What's going on?
I don't know. I think maybe Penix is not fully healthy. I still think that this is a good team. If they win out, there is no doubt to me that they should be in the college football playoff. But now, after losing after winning barely 2 straight games that they had no business being in close games with. These are 2 bad teams. I think there's real questions about whether they can win out. They've got some tough opponents coming up, and we'll see what happens. But things not looking great for them at the moment.
Absolutely not. Next up on the schedule for them, in fact, they
Is
have
Utah next?
tough stretch.
Or is it USC?
They have USC, Utah, Oregon State, and Washington State.
Yeah, not worried about Washington State anymore. They're still in a free fall. But let's look at that Georgia-Florida rivalry, big rivalry every single year. Charlie, no surprise that Georgia came out on top in this one by a lot, is there?
No, not really. Now, I think the more important game here was Oregon smashed Utah. Now, Oregon generally struggles against Utah, as do a lot of teams. Utah is a sneaky team. They stood
Especially at
no
home.
chance against Bo Nix.
No, they didn't. I believe they had won something like 29 of 30 games at home. That streak was snapped. Just a disaster class from Utah, who is probably done in terms of college football playoff odds. Oregon, if they win out, I could see them getting to the playoff. They've just looked dominant recently. And if they win out, likely means a chance at revenge against Washington. So we'll see. But
And one of the
Pac-12 is
reasons that
still
they get
very
that
interesting.
chance is because Oregon State falls to Arizona. That Arizona team is sneaky. They've gotten a couple of big wins against the Pac-12 opponents. As there's some other upsets. Georgia Tech beat number 17 North Carolina, who did they fall out of the rankings?
I'm not positive, but they absolutely should. That's back-to-back absolutely terrible losses for the Tar Heels, who are also probably not looking forward to college basketball season after the disaster that was last year. But Georgia Tech, there was a weird game because Georgia Tech got all of their points, of which there were many, in the second and fourth quarters. Even numbered Georgia Tech is a threat because they've also won games 2, 4, and 6, and lost games 1, 3, and 5. So weird pattern. But if it continues, then they'll beat Georgia in week 13. Charlie.
Maybe. Louisville shut out Duke. And if it's prime time in Colorado, this game that we just watched, it's about 1:30 in the morning. Colorado's done.
Charlie, they have to beat a ranked opponent to make a bowl game. That's not happening.
No, absolutely not. And the other big game was USC came back to beat Cal. Little bit of life here for USC, but it's not enough.
Their schedule too. That's a tough schedule. Only got, I believe, 3 more games left, and their opponents are tough in all of them. I believe it's Washington, Oregon, and UCLA, I believe.
Now, Michigan is in trouble. What do they do?
In a word, everything. They've sent scouts to go film their future opponents' games. That is very illegal, according to NCAA bylaws. So Michigan under investigation. Allegations seem to be pretty serious. Of course, Jim Harbaugh had the recruitment violations and lying to investigators about it, was already suspended for that. So this could be really serious for the Michigan Wolverines, and it comes at a time when their program's at the best it's been in a long time. So, maybe that's the reason why. But Charlie, I think we've waited long enough. Let's talk about the World Series.
Oh, this is gonna be good. Game 3
It's
just
an
wrapped
all-time
up.
classic so far.
Game 3 just wrapped up as of us recording this. Game 1, thriller down in Texas with who else but Aroldis Garcia, walk-off blast to win Game 1. Arizona comebacks dominates Game 2, and Texas got a big win in Game 3 in Arizona. Game 4 it will have already happened by the time when this episode comes out. So Texas will either have a commanding lead or the series will be tied at 2. Where do you think the series will stand by the time this episode comes out?
I don't even know the pitching matchup for Game 4. That's how checked out I am of this World Series, because the interesting thing is, like, I'm definitely not a casual baseball fan. I'm a diehard baseball fan, but at the same time, like, I just don't pay that much attention to baseball when it's not my Mariners playing. But the pitching matchup so far have been interesting. Garcia now looks like injured. We'll see what his status is. But the game 4 pitching matchups, neither team probably wants to be sending that guy out to the mound in a World Series game, but they kind of don't have a choice. And I don't know. Give me Arizona for the fun of it. Give me a 7-game series too, please.
And I think we could very well get it. We could just as easily have one of the teams just dominate the next few games and win the World Series right then and there. But let's wrap up this episode with the NBA and some Formula One. Let's get to the NBA first. How about Wembanyama?
I mean, it's been interesting, Charlie, because I feel like first week he didn't quite meet expectations, but at the same time, expectations were so high. Listen, he was good in the first week. He was fine on defense. He was a game changer, Charlie.
Well, I mean, what can you expect? How are you going to shoot on that guy?
I mean, didn't he block a 3-pointer from the free throw line? I mean, how do you do that? I think it might have been in preseason, but how do you do that?
Nothing. There's nothing you can do. Now, in unfortunate news, the Warriors are good again, so that sucks. Anyway, let's move on.
Charlie, I was wrong. They lost to Phoenix at home on opening day, but an undefeated road trip, huge for them. We're back on track, baby.
No, you're not. You're not making. Even if you make it out of the West, you're not gonna win.
I mean, we might though, because we're the Warriors.
Please don't. All right, now final thing for this episode, we got another update from Formula One. Yeah, we got a triple header. It was Austin last week, Mexico this week, and this weekend is the sprint race at Sao Paulo in Brazil. But how did Mexico go? Sergio Perez really needs to get something going here. He is really on a hot seat with Daniel Ricciardo in his AlphaTauri, qualifying in P4 right in front of Perez. Perez needed to make something work into turn 1, tries to go for a move on Charles Leclerc, and he gets knocked out of his home race in turn 1 of lap 1. This season is becoming a disaster. Red Bull needs to do what they need to do, and they need to get rid of him. I like Sergio Perez. I think he's a pretty good driver. Too many mistakes. The gap, Verstappen has been absolutely unstoppable, but the gap between those two is just ridiculous given the machinery that they both have, and the fact that Perez very well could, at the end of the season, lose second position in the championship to Hamilton, who had a big week, getting P2 with fastest lap, closing the gap in the championship to just 19 points with 3 races and a sprint race left to go. I think it's time that Perez is out at Red Bull. Give me Daniel Ricciardo in 2024 and his return to Red Bull with Max Verstappen as his teammate. And hopefully we can get some better competition. Verstappen, of course, winning that Grand Prix again, to no surprise, breaking his win record from last year and setting a new record for the most wins in a season at 16, with still a chance for 3 more race wins in Brazil, Las Vegas, and Abu Dhabi. The Grand Prix at Vegas will be the first one held at that venue, and that's coming up in 2 weeks' time.
All right, looking forward to it. And finally, before we go real quick, the pitching matchup for Game 4, it will be, for the Rangers, it'll be Andrew Heaney. For the Diamondbacks, Joe Mantiply. Definitely not the Aces. You never expected them to start Game 4 anyway. These pitchers are very far from Aces, but we'll see what happens. But that's going to do it for this episode. So make sure you subscribe to the C&C Talks podcast. Episodes every week wherever you listen to podcasts. And visit our website, cctalks.com, which has everything you need to know about the show. Call us with your questions at 360-389-2630. Again, that's 360-389-2630. And follow us on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it at CC Talks Podcast, and follow Charlie at CC Talks Charlie. For our producer Morris, production designer Zach, and sound designer Drake, I'm Colin.
And I'm Charlie. See you next week.